A mother dies at her own front gate while her son is held back because the HOA said it was against protocol. Lorraine, the neighbor sipping wine across the street, called the board instead of 911, and she had a financial stake in the locks that kept help out. But one video, a broken son's voice, and a grieving father's lawsuit turned silence into a national firestorm. Just wait until you see how this heartbreaking injustice was shattered. And why justice, at last, came crashing through the gate. It was just another perfectly ordinary evening in Winter Pines, the kind of suburban enclave where the lawns are trimmed like military uniforms and the HOA newsletter is treated with more reverence than the Constitution. Mailboxes must be beige, porch lights must be soft white. Children may only ride bikes on Wednesdays after 4 p.m., and God help you if your garbage can is visible for longer than 17 minutes. It was a neighborhood so obsessed with order, it felt less like a place to live and more like a behavioral experiment that had gotten wildly out of hand. Emily Harris, 38, mother of 3, and the kind of person who brought extra snacks to PTA meetings even when no one asked, was walking home from a cardiology appointment. Her car had broken down that morning. She didn't complain. She didn't ask anyone to come pick her up. She simply walked. Because that's who she was. Quiet strength in yoga pants, the kind of woman who apologizes to furniture when she bumps into it. She made it all the way back to her neighborhood. Almost. 48 feet from her front door, her chest seized up. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't cinematic. It was violent. Her breath came out in bursts. She grabbed the edge of the HOA-installed brick fence for balance and collapsed forward, landing on the decorative pebbles just outside the wrought iron security gate that framed her own front yard like a prison courtyard. That gate, of course, was locked. Recently updated, the HOA's new security system boasted smart technology and facial recognition, though in practice, it mostly just failed to recognize faces it didn't like. Supposedly installed to prevent vandalism, it served more effectively as a modern moat, not to keep threats out, but to keep control in. Inside the house, 16-year-old Josh Harris heard the scream. He sprinted to the gate barefoot, phone in one hand, panic swelling in his throat. He pressed his face to the scanner. Nothing. He slammed his fist into the keypad. No response. His mother was convulsing, gasping. Her fingers scraped against the pebbles like she was trying to claw her way back to him. "Open the gate!" Josh screamed so loud it cracked his voice. "Mom, stay with me, please!" From across the street, sitting on a white-painted porch swing with a chilled glass of Pinot Grigio, Mrs. Lorraine Holloway squinted into the sunset. She wore a wide-brimmed sun hat and an expression that had long since withered into permanent disapproval. She watched Emily struggle for exactly 9 seconds before sighing and picking up her phone. She did not call 911. She called the HOA. "Yes, hi, it's Lorraine from Lot 12, she said flatly. "We've got a situation at the front gate. Someone is lying down in front of it. No, I don't know if they're hurt. She doesn't have parking permission, and she's screaming. It's disrupting the atmosphere." She hung up and took another sip. Josh kept fighting with the gate, his hands bleeding from punching the keypad, trying to scale the fence. His mother's eyes were rolling. Her legs kicked once, then twice, then stopped. Behind him, no neighbors moved. No one came. They watched from their Ring cameras, behind closed blinds, safe in the knowledge that whatever this was, it wasn't in the HOA bylaws, not their problem. Emily's body hit the pavement with a sound that Josh would later describe as final. Not a crash, not a thud, just final. Her limbs folded awkwardly under her, one hand twisted in the decorative gravel, her purse landing inches from the keypad on the front gate. She wheezed once, a short, harsh rattle that sliced the air like a blade. Then her back arched, and her legs kicked out like she was fighting something invisible. Something inside her. Josh ran to the gate screaming. His fingers slammed against the buttons in every possible sequence. He tried the facial scanner again, but the machine's cold green light blinked red. He didn't even know what it meant. He didn't care. He backed up, got a running start, and leapt for the fence. He didn't make it all the way up, but he grabbed the top bar and started climbing. That's when the hands pulled him down. Danny Riggs, head of HOA security, 54 years old, former cop turned enforcer of law and uniformity, grabbed Josh by the waist, and yanked him off the gate like a child caught stealing candy. Josh screamed, flailed, kicked. His nails scratched at Danny's forearms until they bled. Danny didn't flinch. "That's enough," he grunted, locking his arms around Josh's chest like a seatbelt. "You're not authorized to cross HOA property lines without permission." "My mom is dying," Josh howled, the words splitting his throat. "Let me go, please. She needs help." Danny didn't look at Emily, didn't move. He just tightened his grip and muttered, "Rules are rules. You can't break protocol, even for her." Emily let out another sound. This one softer, gurgling, like her lungs were filling with water. Her body twisted once more, then went still for a moment, then twitched again. Josh fought harder, but Danny's arms didn't budge. The boy's face turned red, then purple. He screamed again, but his voice cracked. It came out as a rasp. Across the street, someone finally made a call. Not Lorraine. She'd gone back inside. But an anonymous neighbor dialed 911, except the dispatcher had heard this before. "That's a private community?" the voice asked. "Yes," the caller replied. "Winter Pines. A woman's collapsed outside the gate." "I'm sorry, we need explicit authorization from the Homeowners Association before entering a restricted HOA district. Has that been given?" "No, but she's dying." "I understand, ma'am, but we can't enter until we receive confirmation from a board member." And so they waited. The HOA board, 4 members, one of whom was vacationing in Naples, Florida, scrambled onto a Zoom call from their respective homes. On the agenda, whether allowing an ambulance past the gate would violate the community's insurance policy, specifically the clause about non-residents triggering liability. "Do we know if she's technically on HOA property?" asked one. "She's on the curb," said another. "That's a gray zone. Can we get legal on the call?" Someone actually emailed their lawyer. Josh didn't know any of this yet. He only knew that his mother was just feet away and yet unreachable. Not because of distance, but because of grown adults who thought red tape mattered more than red blood. He screamed again. He begged Danny. He bit his arm. He kicked until Danny had to reposition him like a prisoner. But Danny just repeated the same dead phrase. "It's not up to me." 11 minutes. That's how long Emily lasted. 11 minutes of gasping, convulsing, reaching, and blinking up at the sky while her son screamed and fought and broke. Her eyes, they never closed. That's what Josh would remember the most. Not the silence at the end, but the eyes. The way they stayed open, stuck between panic and peace, as if even death didn't understand what had happened. When the paramedics finally arrived, after receiving last-minute clearance from the HOA board's acting president, they found her pulse gone, her body still warm, her fingernails caked with gravel, her mouth slightly open, like she'd been trying to speak. Josh collapsed to the ground where Danny dropped him. He crawled to the gate, pressed his forehead to the bars, and sobbed so violently he nearly threw up. Not a single neighbor came over. Not one person brought water or comforted him. They watched from porches, windows, and phones, because technically she had fallen just outside the property line, and technically no rule had been broken. The morning after Emily Harris died in front of a locked gate, the sun rose with the same indifference as always over Winter Pines. Sprinklers ticked on in sequence. A dog barked once, and in the Harris family's mailbox, beneath a coupon flyer and a realtor's business card, sat a white envelope with the HOA logo embossed in gold. Inside, the letter was typed in 12-point Times New Roman, the font of passive aggression. Notice of violation. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Harris, this letter serves as official notice that your household has violated Section 7.4 of the Winter Pines Community Agreement, unauthorized access or attempted breach of perimeter security. On the evening of date, your family engaged in prohibited behavior by approaching and making physical contact with the community gate without prior clearance. This constitutes a Class B infraction. Fine amount, $250. Due date, within 7 business days. The letter was signed, without irony, by Lorraine Holloway. There was no mention of Emily's death, no acknowledgement of the ambulance, no words of condolence. Just a bill, a price tag for suffering that dared to occur outside their decorative fencing. A punishment for grieving too close to the landscaping. Josh found the envelope first. He didn't say a word, just held it in shaking hands for a moment before folding it neatly in half and placing it on the kitchen counter as if it were something dangerous. After that, he went silent. Not for an hour, not for a day. He simply stopped. No words, no expression. He stared at the floor as though it held some kind of answer. His father, Bill Harris, reacted differently. He didn't speak much either, but he didn't disappear inside himself. He just sat. Every evening, after finishing whatever half-hearted attempt he made at a meal, he'd move to the front hallway and sit on the floor, his back against the wall, facing the gate. He didn't cry. He didn't yell. He just stared through the glass panels of the front door like a man waiting for someone who was already gone, and every time the streetlight flickered on, casting shadows across the sidewalk, he imagined he saw her. Emily, just standing there, smiling like she always had when she came home late from work. But she never moved, because she wasn't there. And neither, it seemed, was justice. Local media didn't cover the story, not even a blip in the police blotter. Rumors said the HOA had sent cease and desist letters to every nearby outlet within 12 hours. Their lawyers worked fast. One editor, who'd tried to run a short piece in the Community Watch column, was allegedly called into a private meeting and returned shaken. She pulled the story. No explanation. It might have stayed buried, except for Luis. Luis Mercado was 24, 2 months into his job as a security assistant for the HOA, and painfully aware that he wasn't welcome at the board meetings, just at the gates. He'd watched everything that night from the security booth, heard the calls, saw the footage, and when Danny told him to delete the video files before they go on the server, Luis hesitated. Instead of deleting them, he copied them to a flash drive, quietly, and quit the next day. By sundown, he'd posted a video on TikTok titled, "This woman died outside her own house. HOA let it happen." The footage was grainy, pulled from 2 angles, one mounted at the gate, the other from the booth. But the audio was crystal clear. Josh's screams cut through like glass, his fists pounding the metal, Emily's gasps, and most chilling of all, a voice from across the street, Lorraine Holloway, sipping wine on her porch, speaking into her phone. "Well, she doesn't look like she belongs here. And honestly, who dies like that? It's so dramatic." The video exploded. Millions of views in hours. Stitch after stitch of creators expressing rage, disbelief, heartbreak. Some wept openly. Others made satirical skits of HOA robots, reading bylaws as people bled to death in the background. But none of them laughed for long, because it was real. And the footage, the silence from the neighbors, the rigidity of the rules, the gate staying shut as a woman took her final breath, was undeniable. Winter Pines had built a fortress, but now the world was at their door. The video reached 27 million views in just 2 days. No press release, no marketing, no production polish, just a shaky split screen of a mother dying outside a gate while her son screamed and a neighbor sipped wine in the background. Raw, unfiltered. The kind of footage that made people freeze mid-scroll, jaw clenched, eyes wide, unsure if what they were watching was real. It was. The hashtag #LetHerDie caught fire like dry brush. TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, even LinkedIn. Platforms lit up with outrage. Influencers who usually posted outfit hauls were suddenly breaking down the timeline of Emily's death. Lawyers analyzed HOA bylaws. EMTs stitched the clip with commentary on how response times are compromised by private community protocols. Civil rights groups called it passive manslaughter. Pastiche and fury danced side by side. There were skits, yes, parodies where actors pretended to be HOA board members, reading bylaws over a bullhorn while people bled on the sidewalk. But the satire never dulled the anger. If anything, it sharpened it. Every joke was a blade. Every meme a protest sign. Some users dug into the HOA's past. Questionable fines, racial profiling complaints, noise violations issued against children laughing too loudly. Others went deeper, suggesting cult-like behavior, calling Winter Pines a gated utopia built on suffering. And then someone, no one quite knows who, showed up in person. A young woman from Chicago, username at NotYourHOA, drove cross-country and planted a 12-foot steel ladder against the outside of the Winter Pines perimeter wall. A handwritten sign dangled from the top rung. If she ever needs help again, at least someone can climb over. It wasn't vandalism. It was a memorial, a statement. And it stayed up for 4 days before the HOA sent someone to remove it at 3 a.m., quietly, with bolt cutters. But the story didn't end there. It deepened. Because just when the internet's rage had reached its boiling point, a whistleblower surfaced, an IT consultant who had helped upgrade the security infrastructure of Winter Pines 6 months earlier. His name wasn't released. His face was blurred, but his voice, in an interview with an independent journalist, was crystal clear. "The gates have a failsafe," he said. "Every gate. They're programmed with administrative override. That means any board member, any one of them, can unlock any gate remotely with a single code. Lorraine had access. So did the HOA president. They could have opened it from their phones. Took 10 seconds. They didn't. Let that sink in. Emily Harris didn't die because of a broken system. She died because people in power chose not to press a button. The internet erupted again, louder, more focused. This time the question wasn't how could this happen? It was who decided to let it? And in the middle of the storm, one person finally stepped into the light. Josh Harris. For 8 days, he hadn't spoken publicly. He refused interviews, ignored cameras, stayed in his room in a silence too large for any 16-year-old to hold. But on the 9th day, something changed. He put on a hoodie, brushed his hair, and walked into the community center, where a local press conference had been scheduled by a city council member calling for an investigation. He didn't wait for the microphone to be offered. He walked straight up, stood behind the podium, and stared at the sea of flashing lights, boom mics, and eyes. He didn't read from paper. He didn't cry. He just said, with a voice that cracked halfway through the sentence but didn't break, "My mom died in front of me, and all of you just watched." There was no applause, no response, just silence. The kind of silence that follows a verdict. Bill Harris filed the lawsuit 10 days after burying his wife. He didn't speak to the press. He didn't make a scene. He simply walked into the county clerk's office with a folder thick with documentation and filed a civil suit that named the Winter Pines Homeowners Association as the primary defendant. But it wasn't just for the wrongful death of Emily Harris. The charges were broader, deeper, sharper: negligence, reckless endangerment, obstruction of emergency medical response, emotional cruelty inflicted on a minor, violation of public safety ordinances, abuse of regulatory authority. And at the center of it all, the most damning accusation: the systematic dehumanization of residents through the rigid codification of life, reducing compassion to compliance and emergency to inconvenience. It wasn't just a lawsuit. It was an indictment of an entire philosophy. The HOA responded as expected, with deflection. Their legal team, assembled from the same firm that represented multiple upscale communities across the state, released a statement denying all wrongdoing. Their defense strategy was technical. The HOA did not directly inhibit emergency response, had no legal duty to override gate access, and could not be held accountable for independent decisions made by first responders. They framed the tragedy as a regrettable miscommunication between public and private infrastructure. But the courtroom was not the HOA boardroom, and Judge Jessica Randolph was not someone easily persuaded by legal gymnastics. She sat on the bench with a sharp gaze and a reputation for no-nonsense rulings. A former public defender, mother of 3, and known for her blistering dissents in cases involving civil negligence. When the HOA's lead counsel attempted to argue that the association held no actionable responsibility for the events that occurred, citing municipal code and zoning language, Judge Randolph raised a hand to silence him. "Let me be sure I understand," she said, voice cool but cutting. "You're arguing that the death of a woman who collapsed outside her own gate while her son begged for help falls under the category of a parking violation?" The courtroom fell still. The attorney blinked. "Your Honor, I was merely pointing out." "No," she interrupted again, firmer now. "You were pointing away from accountability, from common sense, from basic human decency. Please proceed differently. It was the moment the tone shifted. What began as a community legal matter became a national spectacle. News outlets that had initially ignored the story scrambled to catch up. Major networks ran retrospectives. Talk shows debated the ethics of HOAs. Public opinion turned vicious. And when the discovery phase of the trial unearthed new documents, internal emails, meeting transcripts, and vendor contracts, everything broke wide open. It turned out Lorraine Holloway, HOA treasurer and unofficial matriarch of Winter Pines, held a financial stake in the very security firm that installed the smart lock systems. Emails showed she had personally lobbied for the model with remote override capability. She'd even insisted on disabling the failsafe that would allow EMTs access through master codes. One email, dated just 3 weeks before Emily's death, read, "We can't give emergency services full override. That's how liability creeps in. If we start making exceptions, where does it stop?" It was damning, but the corruption didn't end with Lorraine. Journalists began investigating other HOAs across the region. They found patterns, similar security systems, similar enforcement models, and, in some cases, eerily similar deaths. A stroke victim in a neighboring community who died waiting for a gate to open. A toddler locked out during a medical emergency. Winter Pines wasn't an anomaly. It was a blueprint. Senators issued statements. Civil liberties organizations called for oversight. Hashtags surged again. Not hash let her die, but now hash end the gate and hash dead by design. Advocacy groups demanded legislative reform. Town halls erupted with residents from other communities coming forward with stories of intimidation, fines, and emergency delays. Meanwhile, inside the courtroom, Josh sat quietly behind his father, staring at the table where Lorraine now sat, pale and tight-lipped, flanked by her lawyers. Her once impeccable posture wilted as the evidence mounted, her practiced smirk replaced with the taut expression of someone watching the world close in. Bill never looked at her, not once. He focused only on the judge, the testimony, the process. Because this wasn't about vengeance. It was about dismantling the lie that rules are sacred, even when people die following them. Lorraine Holloway took the stand wearing a navy blazer and pearl earrings, the kind of outfit meant to project control and tradition. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, as if she were at a brunch, not on trial for her role in a woman's death. Her voice, when it finally broke the silence, was soft, practiced. "I was frightened," she said, eyes fluttering toward the jury like moths chasing sympathy. "There was so much commotion. I thought it was some kind of performance, a protest maybe. You have to understand, she'd had issues before. She was always late with dues, always calling the board to complain. We didn't know if it was real." Her voice cracked, deliberately. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." The prosecutor didn't move, didn't blink. Just let the silence fill the room like a storm cloud. Then slowly, she stepped forward, one hand resting on the edge of the witness stand. "You thought it was a performance?" she repeated. A woman collapsing, convulsing in the street. Her son screaming was, "In your professional opinion, street theater?" Lorraine opened her mouth, closed it again. Her eyes were now glassy. "I didn't know what I was seeing." "And the solution," the prosecutor continued, voice calm but tightening, "was to do nothing? Not call 911, not check, just sip your wine and make a phone call to the HOA hotline?" "I panicked," Lorraine whispered. "I didn't want to cause unnecessary alarm." The prosecutor tilted her head. "Unnecessary alarm? So you determined unilaterally that this woman, Emily Harris, who died 11 minutes later, didn't meet your personal threshold for emergency?" Lorraine was crying now, real tears, but the courtroom didn't move. No heads tilted, no hands reached for tissues. The silence wasn't sympathetic. It was sealed, like a door slowly closing. "Also," Lorraine added through a trembling voice, she had been late with her fees, several times, and once she put out Halloween decorations before the allowable date. She didn't respect the rules. It's not personal, but some of us thought she was always trying to stir things up. The prosecutor stared at her for a moment, then stepped back. No further questions. She returned to the table and picked up a file. thick, yellow-tabbed, full of pain. "We'd like to enter into Evidence Exhibit 19, she said, her tone now formal. A series of internal communications between HOA board members, time-stamped from the night of October 14th. She handed them to the clerk. The judge nodded. As the pages appeared on the courtroom screens, a few jurors leaned forward involuntarily. They weren't just words, they were confessions. The quiet kind, the corporate kind, the kind that didn't need raised voices to crush lives. 6:12 p.m. She's down again. Anyone know what the protocol is for this? 6:13 p.m. Don't unlock the gate without a vote. Liability exposure's too high. 6:14 p.m. She again? It's always something with her, constant drama. 6:15 p.m. Feels bad, but if we make an exception, we're opening a Pandora's box. 6:16 p.m. Let's wait for legal to weigh in. Better safe than sued. In the back row, Josh Harris sat motionless, his face blank, his eyes dry. He hadn't moved since Lorraine started talking. His hands were clenched on his knees, the tips of his fingers white from pressure. If he heard her sobbing, he gave no sign. If her words meant anything to him, they didn't show. The courtroom wasn't looking at Lorraine anymore. They were looking at the screens. The emails didn't shout. They didn't insult. They simply reduced life to liability, suffering to paperwork. Emily Harris hadn't died because of malice. She died because a group of neighbors decided that inconvenience was a bigger threat than death. And now that decision was being laid bare, line by line, timestamp by timestamp, under the cold glow of courtroom monitors. No one interrupted. No one defended. Because what could be said, they let her die. 6 months later, the fence came down. It didn't happen with ceremony. There were no speeches, no ribbon cuttings, no applause from neighbors. Most of them had already moved or sold their homes after the lawsuit gutted Winter Pines from the inside. But on a quiet Saturday morning, with the sun barely over the rooftops, Bill Harris walked into his front yard with a toolbox, a crowbar, and a folding chair. He didn't hire a crew. He didn't ask for help. He started with one bolt, then another, and then another. Panel by panel, the gate that had once kept life out, that had turned tragedy into policy, came apart. In its place, Bill planted azaleas. He chose flowers that bloomed wide and soft, that leaned towards sunlight like they had nothing to hide. Where once there had been steel and keypads and signs about regulations, there was now a low garden bed and a single wooden post. At the top of the post, a hand-carved sign read, "In this house, help arrives immediately, not by rule, but by conscience." People stopped to read it, delivery drivers, kids on bikes, joggers. They'd pause just for a second and look. Some would nod, a few would take pictures, but no one touched it, no one mocked it. Everyone seemed to know what it meant, even if they didn't know the full story. Inside, the house was quieter now, still heavy, but less so, like the air had finally started to move again. Josh had gone back to school. Not all at once. At first, he'd sit in the nurse's office during class periods just to feel safe, but over time, he found his way forward, not by forgetting, but by doing. He started a program called The First 5 Matter. Every Wednesday after school, he stood in front of a group of students and taught them what he had once begged someone, anyone, to know. How to recognize cardiac arrest, how to use an AED, how to break a window in an emergency, how to call for help when every second counts. It wasn't about trauma, it was about power, about never feeling helpless again. His classmates listened, really listened, not because he was a teacher, but because he had lived it. He also joined the local fire department as a volunteer, the youngest one they'd ever accepted. He passed the background check, the physical, the interview. No one gave him special treatment. He didn't ask for it. He just showed up, every day, with a calmness that was quiet but unshakable. When asked why he wanted to join, he simply said, "So no one else has to watch." That was enough. Back on the edge of the neighborhood, the old HOA office stood hollow. The windows were boarded, the mailbox hung open, stuffed with uncollected flyers. A faded sign still read, "Winter Pines Community Board," but someone had spray painted over it and read, "No hearts allowed." Graffiti covered the walls now, messages, names, dates, flowers. Not vandalism, memorial, expression, truth. The building had once been a monument to control. Now it was a canvas for everything it tried to silence. Josh walked past it often, not because he had to, he could have taken a different route, but because he chose to. He didn't look away, didn't flinch. He looked directly at it every time. And in that act, small and quiet and consistent, there was defiance, there was peace, there was the unspoken message that memory cannot be buried under paint or bylaws or silence. Because Emily Harris wasn't just a tragedy, she was a turning point. A name that now lived on in school programs, in neighborhood reform, in state policy proposals, in whispered conversations between parents who watched the news and thought, not my family. Not again. She became the reason gates were redesigned, the reason emergency access laws were rewritten, the reason more and more communities asked, what are we protecting and at what cost? But for Bill and Josh, she was still just Emily, wife, mother, laugh that echoed through the kitchen, the scent of vanilla in every room, the voice that hummed without realizing, the hands that reached without hesitation. And now, when the azaleas bloom, they don't just color the yard, they mark where the fence used to be and what it took to tear it down.